Okay, hi everybody. This is part 4 of the Greek theater lecture and intro lecture. So, I meant to cover last time just the basic aspects of the acting process in ancient Greece, what the style of acting looked like, because it is very different from what we're used to. So, again, for all of the things, there's my cat in the background making a cameo appearance. For all of the things that we get from ancient Greece and the theater from back then that is very much like what we have. There are plenty of things that make it weird and different. And the performance style certainly is that. So traditionally, like I mentioned last time with talking about Thespis and the chorus, all Greek theater originally, back in the day, was sung. So the chorus would sing in unison. The actors, there were either 2 actors or 3, depending on how late in the period we're talking about. One actor playing the main part, secondary actor playing the other big roles, and then a third actor playing all the small parts, and then the chorus. Yeah, they're all singing. And again, it's not like they're trying to harmonize or anything, or sound like a musical theater number. It's just they sang everything as part of this worship performance ceremony. So I mentioned last time as well that in tragedy, in the serious plays that they performed, the actors would all wear giant wooden tiki head masks with the primary emotion of their character carved on the front of the mask, the smiley face or the frowny face, depending on whether your character's on top of the world or, stuff just got real. They're wearing robes and free-flowing fabrics for most other costume items, and I just find this particularly funny. Again, remember, the theaters potentially could be huge, and to give the actors more visibility to the audience, that's why they're wearing the giant tiki head masks, then to even more set the actors apart over the chorus. In tragedy, the actors would perform on platform shoes to give them extra height. But see, I say platform shoes, and what pops into your head probably isn't the right thing. Like, I say platform shoes, for many of us, what we think is, 1970s Superfly, like, platform shoes. No. Greek actors in tragedy performed on, 3-foot-tall Lady Gaga platform shoes, right? Which, okay, you think about it, these great works of tragedy and, oh my god, weeping, wailing, and gnashing of teeth, and they're walking around on giant 3-foot-tall wooden platform shoes. That sounds hysterically funny to me. So I don't know that that relates. That we can relate to that performance style. I don't know that we could take somebody seriously who's wearing 3-foot-tall platform shoes and a giant wooden tiki head mask and singing. Anyway, that's the acting style for the tragedy in ancient Greece. We'll talk a little bit later about maybe some of the stuff with comedies, but that's later. Okay, so moving on from that, I meant to mention that last time, totally forgot. So, at this point, I'm picking up slide 37 if you're wanting to follow along. At this point, it is important to acknowledge that some of you might very well be questioning your life choices right now as to signing up for this dumb class. So I try to live my life like everything is all fun and games until somebody pokes an eye out or writes something down. Well, Aristotle is the one who wrote all this stuff down. So if you are questioning your life choices about why, dear God, why did you sign up for this class? Well, blame that son of a... because he's the one who wrote everything down. So Aristotle is the one to blame, not me. And Aristotle is important for any number of reasons. I mean, he, along with Plato and Socrates, are the minds behind the basics of philosophical thought in all of Western civilization. He also was the teacher of Alexander the Great, who conquered the known world, for the Greeks at least, back then. And as for why you should care about who Aristotle was as a human being, he is responsible for much of the beginnings of what we think about in regards to the study of logic, the beginnings of the scientific method, the study of geology, of physics, of metaphysics, the study of biology, ethical thought, political thought, rhetorical thought, speaking out loud, yeah, among many, many other areas. But why you should care about him as a theater student is because he is the one who codified, he wrote down the essential elements of narrative story structure and defined what tragedy and comedy were in his spare time, evidently. So yeah, blame Aristotle. Aristotle did this in a work called the Poetics, which was written in roughly 335 BC. It is the first major work that's focused on dramatic theory and literary theory. And while it is, super ancient old, many elements of the Poetics remain basically still at the root of our modern thinking on how to tell a story and how story works. There were 2 volumes of Poetics that Aristotle wrote. The first volume was exclusively about tragedy, and the second one was about comedy. And sadly, only one part of the work survived through the years. We have the volume on tragedy. So we don't exactly totally know what Aristotle thought about comedy. I mean, he throws shade at comedy in the volume on tragedy, so he was a much bigger fan of tragedy in theater. So he must have been a blast to hang out with at parties. So yeah, he throws shade at comedy. He feels that tragedy, Aristotle feels that tragedy is important, more important to watch because instead of just being entertainment, there is that religious function, the societal function that helps the audience watching tragedy that isn't necessarily going to be there if they're just watching a comedy. So, the Poetics created the accepted definition of this new form of theater that Thespis created, the tragedy, and Aristotle defined the 6 elements that he felt were the essential components of what makes a tragedy. And please understand that I will not, on a test ever be like, what is the second element yet? No, I'm going to run you through the highlights just so that you have some understanding of what they are. But no, I'm not going to be like, what is the third element of tragedy? Yeah, no. But before I even get into all that, the chief thing to remember and understand about Aristotle and his views on tragedy and what is important in tragedy is the idea of the word catharsis, right? We are on slide 43 if you're keeping score. At the center of all tragedy is the idea of catharsis, where the audience goes to watch a play, and by what happens in the play, they are moved to feel the emotions of pity and fear by the events taking place on stage. You pity the poor characters who are suffering from all the bad stuff that's happening to them, and you fear that if you make the mistakes that they make, what happened to them will happen to you. Aristotle thought that having witnessed those events and their consequences on the characters on stage, he believed that viewers would then purge the desire to commit such acts or commit those same sins or make those same decisions that led to the characters' downfalls, that you would be less likely to make that bad choice because you saw what happened to them. So yeah, catharsis is at the heart of our storytelling. It still is. I mean, we think that we're above that, and yet we're not, because, consider, in a Friday the 13th movie, what happens to unmarried characters that go off and have sex with one another? Jason Voorhees shows up and rams a spear through the back of their heads, right? So yeah, you watch a societal convention be enforced, right? What happened to them? See, if you have unprotected, unmarried sex, teenagers, oh my God, bad things. There's a movie called Fatal Attraction that starred Michael Douglas as this architect who's happily married, wife and kid, and then the wife and kid go out of town, and then he has a crazy one-night stand with a smoking hot Glenn Close, who has the big crazy eyes that he just can't resist, and he thinks it's a one-night stand and thinks she's all cool, but then when he tries to break it off with her, because he is otherwise happily married, she's like, well, I'm not garbage, you're not just going to throw me away, and the crazy eyes get bigger and bigger, and then she tries to murder him, his family, boils his kid Pet Rabbit. Yeah, we think that we're beyond and more sophisticated than catharsis, but the year that Fatal Attraction came out in the 80s, the divorce rate in America dropped by 15%. Yeah, suddenly all those guys watching the movie were like, I was thinking about that crazy-eyed hot girl, but you know what? I don't want my kid's pet rabbit getting boiled. And yeah, people made that choice. So there is something to say and something behind this whole idea about catharsis that Aristotle got right. All right, so here are these 6 elements, and I'm going to slam through them pretty fast just to explain what I'm talking about with them. So element number 1, this is the most important element to a tragedy for Aristotle, and that is the plot. That is what happens in the story, right? Aristotle felt that a plot has to be complete, that it only works, that a story only works when it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. He believed that plots should contain reversal of fortune for the characters. If you start out on top of the world, you're going to get brought down. If you start out low, you're going to get risen up. That, since we're talking about tragedy, that the plot should arouse pity and fear in the audience. That the actions that happen should be logical and follow the actions that precede them. Ebenezer Scrooge doesn't start out as a miserly old SOB and then suddenly become Father Christmas at the end without getting visited by the three ghosts. That character change, the story change, has to make sense. So the beginning gives rise to what happens in the middle, which gives rise to what happens at the end. Stories need a beginning, a middle, and an end. And yeah, we have not moved very far from that at all over the last couple thousand years. Every movie that you could think of has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Even something like Pulp Fiction, which plays around with the timeline. Yeah, it has a beginning, a middle, and an end, a discernible one. So yeah, we still use that. That is at the heart of our storytelling still. Second element, in terms of importance, character. Aristotle believed that the actions that plague the main characters should come from their own doing. In English, this is called a tragic flaw, right? That the characters are not brought down in a tragedy by outside forces, that they are brought down by their own sins, by their own pride or greed or lust or whatever. Also, according to Aristotle, characters in a tragedy should be, quote, good. He felt that nobody wants to just watch a bad guy get away with doing bad things and not get punished for it. We have changed and adapted that over the couple of thousand years. We kind of enjoy that sometimes. Aristotle also felt that characters should be true to type. Soldiers are brave, scholars are smart, unless you explain why they're not. That they should be true to life, realistic, because yeah, if you want the audience to have an emotional reaction, they need to be looking at things that seem like real life. That characters behave realistically. That characters should be true to themselves, consistent. That, yeah, Ebenezer Scrooge doesn't become all like sweet and kind and generous without a reason for that happening. Element number 3 is thought that is related to theme, if you want to break out a literary term as far as Aristotle's concerned. So that's like man versus fate, or man versus man, or man versus nature. Anyway, Aristotle felt that the overall themes of tragedy should be larger than life, that they are bigger, more epic, more noble than the things that happen in our day-to-day lives. Because, I mean, from the societal change perspective, right, you go and watch a play about, you know, a guy who's your next door neighbor, and they make a bad mistake and they get brought down by it. Sitting out in the audience, you could be watching it and go, well, yeah, that sucks for him that happened, but I'm smarter than my next door neighbor. That wouldn't happen to me. So no, you don't watch your next door neighbor get brought down. You watch Hercules get brought down. It's like, oh man, look what happened to Hercules. I'm no Hercules. What happened to Hercules could happen to me. Oh my God. So yeah. Number 4. Yeah, I know you're not paying attention and you're like clicking out of this video. I'll run through these fast. Diction is what the characters actually say. That the characters should speak speeches that reflect who they are. Melody, because number 5, melody. The music, Aristotle felt that the chorus should be fully integrated into the play like an actor, that the music is part of the story. And then lastly, least important to Aristotle, is spectacle, which refers to the sets, costumes, props, visual gimmickry of the performance. So yeah, Aristotle felt that this was the least important element. For us, in the modern world, frequently we kind of feel like that's the most important element, right? I mean, I love all experimental arty theater, but if I pay $100 to go watch a play set in, you know, a jungle, and they just wheel out 4 black boxes and set them down on stage, and they're like, oh wow, we're in the jungle. It's like, why did you charge me $100 for this? So for us, spectacle is kind of the most important thing. It's partially because we're used to seeing realistic movies. But yeah, spectacle's most important for us, least important to Aristotle. That's not a value judgment, it is just a difference between us. Anyway, that all relates to what Aristotle defined as a tragedy. And yeah, so one last video in all of this where I am going to walk you through the plot of a Greek tragedy. I'm just going to, you know, slam through it real fast and summarize it so I can show you all the elements of Aristotle's, you know, definition and stuff at work and how they function within a story from back then. And it's one that I have personal experience working on because it's the one that I performed when I was over there. All right, check back in with you in just a bit.